I turned down a company once. Not a small one, either 88 years old, 4 delivery routes, 61 employees, a building with my whole adult life inside it. A man I respected sat across a folding table from me in the break room of that building and offered me the entire thing, free and clear, no money down, and I said no. I have been asked about it maybe 200 times since. Guys on the dock ask. My cousin in Newark asks every Thanksgiving like he's hoping I'll finally crack and give a different answer. And there is a version of the story I tell at Thanksgiving, which is short and has a joke in it, and there is the real one, which I have told exactly twice in my life. This is the real one. I want to be careful about one thing before I start, because I have heard people repeat this story around town with the wrong bones in it. I did not turn it down because I was noble. I have never once in 34 years been the most noble man in a room. I turned it down because of what the offer would have done to a sentence somebody said to me 11 seconds after it was made. She said it low, standing at my shoulder, close enough that nobody else in that room heard it. 6 words. And those 6 words made the whole company worthless to me, in the specific sense that if I had taken it, I would never have been able to believe her. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since, about how the most expensive thing that ever happened to me cost me a business, and how it was the cheapest deal I have ever been offered. But I am ahead of myself. To make any of this land, you need to know what a bread plant sounds like at 3 in the morning, and you need to know about a crock of sourdough starter named Ida, and you need to know what happened during the ice storm in March. My name is August Marek, Gus, to everyone who has ever met me, including my mother, who chose the long version and then never used it. I was the night bake foreman at the Kellerman Bread Company in Zanesville, Ohio, which sits on 9 acres off Linden Avenue, with a rail spur nobody has used since 1994, and a water tower with the name painted on it in letters you can read from the highway. Here is what a bread plant is, if you have never stood in one. It is hot. That is the first thing. In August, the floor near the ovens runs 110, and you drink water you do not taste. It smells like the best thing you have ever smelled, for the first 90 minutes, and then your nose quits and you do not smell anything for 8 years. There is flour in the air at all times, so fine you only see it in the light over the divider, and it settles on everything, and if you work nights long enough you stop noticing that you are always faintly white at the forearms, like a man who has been handling ghosts. The night crew was 11 people. We started at 9, and we ran until the wholesale trucks pulled out at 5:40. Ray Ocampo ran the mixers, and had run them since 1989. Suzette ran wrap. Dontrell and the 2 Pham brothers worked the oven end with me. And in the corner of the sponge room, on a steel table with a strip of blue tape around its base, so nobody would ever set a pan on it, there was a stoneware crock the size of a bushel basket, with a wooden lid and a cloth over it. That was Ida. Ida Kellerman started that culture in 1937 in a farmhouse kitchen in Dresden with rye flour and well water and, family legend says, a great deal of stubbornness aimed at a husband who had just lost a hardware store. Her son Otto built the plant. Her grandson Walt ran it. And that culture, the same unbroken line of it, fed and split and fed again, went into every loaf of Kellerman sour that came off our line, 88 years running. Somebody feeds Ida every single night. It has been somebody's job since Roosevelt. For 9 years it was mine. You want to understand why I stayed on nights that long, at a job with a ceiling on it, you have to know about my mother. Bernadette Marek ran a rap line station at Kellerman's for 22 years. Started at 19, 4 months pregnant with me, and worked there until 1998, when Otto Kellerman brought in a consultant from Columbus and restructured the rap department, and 41 people got walked out with a letter. My mother was 11 weeks short of vesting. She was 39 years old, and she cried in the truck in the lot, and then she went home and got a job at the county nursing home, and worked there another 19 years. And here is the part that has never stopped working on me like a splinter. She never once got mad at that company. She called it our plant until the day she died. She'd point at the water tower driving past and say, "There she is." When I got hired on at 19, she was so proud she took a picture of me in the parking lot. I loved that woman past all reason, and I have never forgiven Kellerman Bread for the 11 weeks, and both of those things were true at the same time for my entire adult life. So no, I did not grow up believing a company was a thing a man gets handed. I grew up knowing it is a thing that can be taken from you between a Tuesday and a Wednesday by a man in an office who has your name on a list. That is who was sitting at that folding table when the offer came. October the 6th, a Monday. Walt Kellerman came in at 4 in the morning, which he did not do anymore. He was 67, and he had come off a stroke in February, a small one, the doctors said, though I have never once heard a man describe his own stroke as small. It had taken about 15% out of his left hand and something harder to name out of the rest of him. He used to walk the floor twice a shift. After February, he mostly did not. He came in with a thermos and asked me to sit down in the break room when the 4 o'clock pans were in, and I sat down across a folding table from him with the ovens roaring on the other side of the wall. I am not going to give you his exact words yet. I could. I have had them memorized for years. They are 11 words long, and I can hear his voice doing them. But when a thing is said to one man in a room at 4 in the morning, with a thermos on the table and a hand that does not close all the way, that thing means one thing. And when the same sentence gets said out loud in a room with other people in it, it means something else entirely. And it was the second version that broke the whole thing open. So I am going to keep his words for later and tell you what he laid out. He told me the numbers first, because Walt was a numbers first man. Kellerman Breed had a line of credit at Muskingum Valley Bank that he had personally guaranteed with the plant and his house. The 2024 flour contracts had been brutal. Our biggest wholesale account, 19 eager and independent grocers across 4 counties, was up for renewal in the spring, and their buyer had already sent a letter about consolidating suppliers. And Brandt Foods out of Columbus had made an offer in September to buy the whole operation. Good money. The kind of money that would have let a 67-year-old man with a bad hand go sit down somewhere warm. Brandt would keep the brand. Brandt would keep the recipes. Brandt would close the Zanesville plant inside 18 months and run the volume out of their facility on Alum Creek Drive, because that is what roll-ups do, and Walt knew it, and Brandt knew he knew it, and nobody in that negotiation had been rude enough to say it out loud. 61 jobs. In a town that has watched mosaic tile and everything else go. The bank wants a continuity plan, he said. They want a name, a person who runs it after me. And I've got a daughter who won't take it, and a plant super who'd take it and shouldn't, and then I've got you. I said the obvious thing. I said, Walt, she's your daughter. And he looked at his own left hand on the table and said, you don't know the half of that, and I'm not going to tell it to you. Then he made the offer. It had a condition in it, and you already know what the condition was, because I have told you the shape of this story. He said it plainly and without embarrassment, the way a man of that generation from that town says a thing he has thought about for 6 weeks. He said he'd been watching me for 9 years. He said he'd watched me in March. He said the two of us would be good for each other, and better for the plant, and that he was not going to pretend the second part wasn't in his thinking. I sat there with my hands flat on that folding table, and did not say anything for long enough that the oven timer went off in the other room. Because here is what I could not tell him. Margot Kellerman had been driving the Tuesday-Thursday route out of our dock for 2 years. I had loaded her truck 200 times. I had learned how she took her coffee, which is a stupid thing for a grown man to know, and I had learned the sound of her boots on the dock plate from the far end of the building. Which is stupider, and I had spent 2 years running an argument in my own head that I always won and never believed, which went, "She is the owner's daughter, and you are a night foreman whose mother got a letter, and there is a whole century of that story, and it never ends well for the man on nights." Walt Kellerman had just handed me the thing I wanted with a price tag hanging off it that made it unwantable. He was not being cruel, I want that clear. He was a decent man doing arithmetic with a bad hand and a bank breathing on him. But he had made it so that if I ever walked up to his daughter and said what I had wanted to say for 2 years, she would never in her life be able to tell whether I was saying it to her or to the building. I did not answer him that morning. I said I needed to think, and he said take a week, and I took it, and I spent it doing what I always did, which is show up at 9 and feed a crock of sourdough at 11, and go home at 6 in the morning with my forearms white. That Tuesday, Margot came for her truck. I want to describe her carefully because the version of her that lives in this town's telling of the story is a rich man's daughter, and that is so far off the mark it makes me tired. She was 33. She wore steel toes and a Carhartt with a torn cuff, and she loaded her own pallets, which no other route driver did, because she was faster at it than the dock kid, and she did not have the patience to stand there while somebody else was slow. She had gone to Columbus at 24 and opened her own place, a little sourdough bakery in Clintonville, and run it for 5 years, and lost it in 2022, for reasons I did not know yet. She came back to Zanesville and asked her father for a job, and he put her on Roots. 2 years. Roots, that is the fact everyone forgets when they tell this story, and it is the fact the whole thing turns on. The dock at 4:30 in the morning is one of the good places on this earth, and I will fight anybody about it. The roll door is up. It is cold, and behind you it is 100 degrees. So you stand in the seam of those two things. The lot lights are on, and the air is full of that flour dust. Everything smells like bread, which is the smell of somebody having gotten up early on your behalf for 100,000 years. We talked out there. That is all. 2 years of 5-minute conversations on a loading dock, 3 or 4 times a week, adding up the way water does. She told me about the Clintonville place in pieces, about the $1,100 rent that became $2,600, about baking 400 loaves a week alone. I told her about my mother. Not the letter, not for a long time, just the woman. There was a Saturday in the second spring, too, that I think about more than the big scenes. Kellerman's ran a day-old outlet in the front corner of the building, opened Saturdays 8 to noon, $3 a bag, and it was the closest thing that plant had to a front porch. Old men came in for the rye and stayed 40 minutes. Women from the apartments on Blue Avenue came with strollers. Margot worked it most Saturdays because her father hated to pay somebody to. I came in on my day off to swap a bearing on the divider, which could have waited until Monday, and both of us knew it. She had brought her own bake from home, 2 loaves, hers out of her own oven on Dresden Road, made with a piece of Ida she was not supposed to have, and had obviously taken anyway, and she cut me a slice on the counter between customers and stood there with her arms crossed while I ate it, which is the single most exposed thing a baker ever does. It was better than ours. Not a little. The crust had that dark, blistered shoulder you only get out of a home oven with a lid on the pot, and the crumb was open and wet and smelled like a cellar in the good way. I said so. She said, "Say it louder. The office is right there." And then she laughed, and then she stopped laughing and looked out the front window at the lot for a second, and I understood that I had just praised the only thing she had left over from 5 years of her life that ended badly, and that it had landed somewhere deep, and she was not going to let me see where. I fixed a bearing that did not need fixing, and went home at noon and did not sleep well. And every night before the shift ended, I'd go back to the sponge room and feed Ida. And one night in the 2nd year, Margot followed me in with her coffee and watched me do it, and said, "Dad let you take Ida?" Somebody's got to. He didn't let me take Ida. She said it lightly. It did not land lightly. She looked at that crock for a second too long. That's the family thing. That's the actual family thing. The building's just a building. I remember exactly what I said, because it was clumsy and true, and it is the first time I ever saw her look at me straight on. I said, "Then he's an idiot about it." She laughed, once, into her coffee. And she did not disagree. The Thursday of that week, Dolores Vacorn came and found me in the sponge room. Dee was 56 years old, and she was our plant superintendent, and she had been at Kellerman's for 27 years. She hired me. She was the one who walked a 19-year-old kid down the line in 2010 and told him that if he showed up on time for a year, she would teach him something worth knowing. And then she did. She ran that plant through 2008 when we went to 4 days. She ran it through the 2014 recall, when a supplier's seed contamination cost us 6 weeks, and she slept in the office 3 nights running. She had a binder in her desk with every preventive maintenance interval on every piece of equipment in that building written in her own hand, because the software we bought in 2019 was garbage, and she never trusted it. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded and said, "He offered it to you. Dee, don't. I've been here since Clinton. I know what a man looks like when he's been offered something." She came in and put her hand flat on the steel table next to Ida's crock. "Did you say yes?" "I haven't said anything." "Are you going to?" "I don't know." And then she told me, in a voice with no heat in it at all, which was worse than shouting, exactly what she had put into that building. The years. The recall. Her marriage, which had not survived 2008. The fact that she had turned down a plant manager job at a snack outfit in Lancaster in 2016 that paid $22,000 more, because Walt had sat in her kitchen and said, "Give me 10 more years, and this place is yours to run." 10 years was 2 years ago, she said. "I know. So let me say the part I came to say, and then I'll go run your line for you." She looked at me. "I'm not against you, Gus. I want you to hear that plain, because in about a week people are going to start telling you I'm against you. I've got no quarrel with you at all. You're good, and you've always been good, and I made you, and I'd say so under oath. Then what? I'm against the way it's being done." Her voice did not rise. It got flatter, and that was how I knew what it cost. 27 years, and the deciding factor is who a man's daughter marries. That's not a business decision. That's 1953. If he'd looked at the two of us and picked you on the merits, I'd have shaken your hand and meant it. But he didn't do that. He solved a family problem, and he's calling it a succession plan, and he's going to hand this building to whoever's willing to stand still for it. She went to the door. "You know what the ugly part is," she said. "He might be right that you're the best one for it. That's what I can't get past. He might be right and he still did it the wrong way, and if you take it like that, then that's how you got it, and that's how you'll always have got it. Then she went out to run my line for me, because she had said she would. Word got around the plant in about 9 days, the way it always does. Not from Walt, not from Dee, who I would bet the building never said one syllable to anybody. It got around, because that is what plants do. And it got to Margot before I did. She came in on a Thursday in the 3rd week of October and did not load her pallets. She stood on the dock plate with her hands in her coat pockets and said, "Is it true? I have replayed that morning more than any other 5 minutes of my life. I could have said, 'Your father asked me to run the company,' all true. Nothing hidden in it that I had any right to be the one to reveal. What I said was, yes, all of it. Margot, because I heard it from Suzette," she said, on a rap line. At 2 in the morning, that my father offered a man the company on the condition that he marries me. Her voice was very level, and her eyes were not. Do you know what that felt like, standing there with my hands in a bread rack? I'd guess it felt like being a line item. It felt like being inventory. She said it and then she looked away, out at the lot lights. 2 years I've been driving that truck. 2 years. I've asked him 4 times to let me into the office, and he says routes are good for me. I run 400 stops a month, and I know every buyer in 4 counties by their first name and their kids' names, and he thinks I can't hold a plant floor. She laughed, and there was nothing good in it. And then he offers it to somebody else, and puts me in the deal like a set of steak knives. He's scared, I said. That's not a defense, it's just the fact. I know he's scared. I've been the one driving him to Columbus for the follow-up since February. She turned back to me. "Are you going to take it?" And I said the only thing I had, which was, "Not like this." "Because of me?" "Because of the shape of it," I said. "Margot, if I take that building on those terms, then every single thing I ever say to you after that has a price on it. You will lie in bed at 2 in the morning some night in 10 years and wonder. You won't be able to help it. I wouldn't be able to help it either, and I'd be the one who knew better." She stood there a long moment on that dock plate in the cold with the ovens roaring behind us. "Say the other part," she said. "What other part?" "The part where you said because of me would have been a real answer." Her jaw was set. "You just told me what you won't do. You haven't told me one thing about what you want." And I did not answer her. That is the true and unflattering fact of it. I stood there with 9 years of night shifts and a mother's letter and every reason a man builds up for keeping his mouth shut, and I let a woman ask me a direct question at 4:30 in the morning, and I did not answer it. She got in the truck and did her route. I went home that morning and did something I had not done in 6 or 7 years. My mother kept a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet, and when she died in 2017, I moved the whole thing to mine without going through it, which is a thing people do. In it there is a Kellerman-bred 20-year service pin in a little plastic case, and about 40 photographs, and a Polaroid of a skinny 19-year-old in a parking lot squinting into the sun on his first day. And there is a letter, 1 page, dated February the 9th, 1998, on company stationery, signed by a man named Otto Kellerman, who had been dead 9 years by then. 3 paragraphs. The middle one uses the phrase, "We thank you for your service to the Kellerman family." I sat on the end of my bed at 7 in the morning, with the shades down, and read a letter I have known by heart since I was 7 years old. And what I kept turning over was not the letter. It was my mother pointing at the water tower on Linden Avenue from the passenger seat of my truck in 2011, 13 years after they walked her out, saying there she is, with no bitterness in it anywhere that I was ever able to find. I had spent my whole adult life believing that made her a saint or a fool, and sitting there that morning I finally understood it was neither. She had just never once confused the building with the men who happened to be running it that year. She loved the plant. The plant was 61 people, and a smell and a water tower with a name on it. The letter was 3 paragraphs from one scared man in an office. I had been letting a piece of paper decide what I was allowed to want for 27 years. 11 days later, Walt scheduled the meeting. 2 nights before that meeting, I found out what happened in March. Not from her, from Ray Ocampo, who had been running mixers since 1989, and who never in his life said a thing he had not chewed on first. You have to understand what March was. March 14th, an ice storm came through the Muskingum Valley and took down the line on Linden Avenue at 9:40 in the evening. Ape had 400 crews out across the state. Our block was dark for 11 hours. I have told the front half of this story before. I lived 2.5 miles from the plant. My truck would not get out of my own street. So I walked it, in freezing rain, and got there a little after midnight. Not for the product. Product is insured. We lost 800 pounds of dough that night and nobody cared. I went for the crock. Ida is a living thing. She is a colony of yeast and bacteria that has been fed every day since 1937, and she is fine in a cold room for a while, and she is not fine at 26 degrees in a building with no heat for 11 hours, and no way to know how long 11 would turn into. So I went in with a flashlight, and I got the crock and I split her, half in a smaller container that I wrapped in my coat, half left in the sponge room, in case I dropped the first one on the ice. And I sat in the cab of the plant's box truck with the engine running and the heater on the floorboard, and that crock on the passenger seat under my coat, and I fed her at 2 and again at 6, and I listened to the trees come down. Around 2:45, headlights came into the lot. Margot, in her father's Silverado, because she had been trying to reach the plant since midnight and the roads were what they were. She got in the passenger side and moved the crock onto her lap, and I remember she took her gloves off to do it. Which tells you something about how a person raised in a bakery handles a living culture even at 3 in the morning in an ice storm. We sat there for 2 hours in a running truck in the dark. The lot lights were out with everything else, so it was blacker than that lot has ever been, and every 4 or 5 minutes there was a crack out on Linden like a rifle going off, which was another limb coming down. The wipers were doing nothing useful. The heater roared. She held that crock on her lap like a cat. We talked about nothing at all. Whether the rap line would run in the morning, her father's left hand and how he had started hiding it in his pocket at church. My mother, who I told her about that night in more detail than I had told anyone in years. The nursing home, the 19 years, the way she said there she is driving past the tower. I did not tell her about the letter. That part I kept. Around 5, she asked me what happens to Ida if a person forgets. I said she'd go sour and then flat and then she'd just be flour and water, and there is no getting her back, because the thing that makes her worth anything is the unbroken part. 88 years of somebody showing up. You can start a new culture in 9 days. You cannot start that one ever again, and that is the whole of what makes it precious. She said, and looked out the windshield at the dark, and we did not say anything else for a while. That is the entire event, from where I sat. What I did not know, and what Ray told me in the break room 19 months later while stirring a coffee he never drank, was the other half. Walt Kellerman had called 3 people that night. Dee, who was in Roseville with a tree across her driveway. Ray, who came. And Margot. And what he said to Margot on the phone at 11 o'clock at night was, "Don't worry about the starter. I already called Gus. He'll have gone in for it." He had not called me. He never called me. He had simply told his daughter, with total confidence, at 11 at night in an ice storm, that a man he was not paying to be there was already there. Ray said Margot drove out to see if it was true. She sat in this break room the next morning, Ray said. 6:30, coat still on. And she said to me, "Ray, he walked. He finally drank the coffee." And I said yes he did. And she got up and went and did her route. I sat there with that for a while. Then I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" Ray Ocampo has a way of looking at a man that has ended arguments in that building for 35 years. "Because there's a meeting Thursday," he said, "and I've watched you two stand on that dock for 2 years. And in about 48 hours, somebody in a suit from Columbus is going to make it so neither of you can ever say a plain thing to the other one again. And I've been married 31 years, Gus. You don't get that many plain sentences. You get maybe 6 in your whole life, and you had better spend them." Thursday, October 30th, 2 in the afternoon, which is the middle of the night for a man on my schedule. The break room. Folding tables pushed into a square. Walt at the end. Charla Preen from Muskingum Valley Bank with a folder. Cliff Nesbitt from Brant Foods, who had driven down from Columbus in a very clean car. Dee Vacorn with her bunda in front of her, unopened, which I understood to be a state. Margot against the wall by the vending machine, arms folded, because there were only 6 chairs and she had not been given one. She had not been given a chair. In her own family's building. Charla laid out the credit position. Nesbitt laid out Brant's revised number and used the phrase "no near-term footprint changes," which is a sentence that means the exact opposite of what it appears to mean. And Dee's jaw moved, and nobody said anything. Then Walt Kellerman put both hands on the table and said he had a continuity plan, and he wanted it on the record in front of the bank. And he said the 11 words out loud. "Marry my daughter, and the company is yours." I want you to understand what happened in that room. At 4 in the morning, over a thermos, that sentence had sounded like an old man's clumsy affection. Out loud at 2 in the afternoon, in front of a banker with a folder and a stranger from Columbus, and a woman with 27 years in that building, and a daughter standing up against a vending machine because there were only 6 chairs. Out loud. It sounded like exactly what it was. Dee looked at the table. Charla Prine looked at her pen. Nesbitt looked frankly delighted, because a family in disarray is a discount. And Margot's face did something I will carry to the end of my life. Not anger. She had done her anger on a dock plate 11 days before. It just went still, the way a face goes when a person is doing math on their own worth in public and coming up short. I got up out of my chair. I did not plan one word of what I said, and I have been told since that it was not a speech, which is fine, because it was not meant to be one. I said, "No, sir." Then I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll run your night side another 20 years and be glad of the work. And I'll say the rest of this in front of the bank because it ought to be in front of the bank." I said, "You've got a successor. She's been driving your Tuesday-Thursday route for 2 years, while you decided whether she was serious. She knows every buyer in 4 counties by name. She ran a bakery of her own for 5 years in a city that eats bakeries. She's the only person in this room who has ever personally made payroll and personally missed it. And she is the only Kellerman left, and you tried to hand the family thing to a man who isn't one." I said, "And Dee Vacorn should have had plant president in writing in 2016, and everybody at this table knows it." I said, "You want a continuity plan? There it is. It's got 2 names on it and neither one of them is mine. And it doesn't require anybody to marry anybody." Nobody spoke. Charla Prine wrote something down, which is how bankers show emotion. And then Margot came off the wall and crossed the room and stood at my shoulder, close, with her arms still folded, and she put her mouth near my ear and she said it, low, so that not one other person in that room heard it. "I picked you in March." 4 words in and I already knew where she was going, and the last 2 took the floor out from under me anyway. I turned my head. She was looking straight ahead at the table, at her father, jaw set, doing that thing she does where she says the biggest sentence of her life to the side of your face because looking at you while she says it would be too much. "You didn't know I was going to," she said, still not looking at me. "Neither did I. That's how you know it's not the building." The deal did not close. Brandt walked in December when the bank restructured the note with 2 names on the continuity plan, and Cliff Nesbitt drove his clean car back up 70, and I have never seen him again. Margot Kellerman took the company on the 9th of January. Dee Vacorn signed a plant president's agreement the same morning, 6 pages, drawn up by an actual attorney, with a number in it that made her put the paper down and look out the window for a second. She stayed 8 more years and trained the woman who has it now. I stayed on nights. People thought that was the strangest part. Ownership in the family and the man sleeps till 4 in the afternoon, but I liked my crew, and I liked the seam between the cold dock and the hot floor, and there is a thing that happens at 3 in the morning in a building running well that I have never been able to explain to a day shift person. Walt lived 4 more years. He got so he could not do much with the left hand at all, and he spent most of his last 2 summers on the porch on Adair Avenue, and he and I got along better than we ever had, mostly by not discussing October of 2025 ever again. Once near the end he said, "I did it badly." I said he did. That was the whole conversation, and it was enough for both of us. Margot and I were married in the spring of 2027 at the Presbyterian Church on 5th, with 61 people from the plant in the back half of the sanctuary, and Ray Ocampo, who was 71 by then, made a toast so short that people were still setting down their forks when he finished. We have a daughter. Bernadette, after my mother. She is 6, and she is not allowed to touch anything in the sponge room, and she does anyway. Ada is still going. 88 years became 91. And most nights, a little before 11, my wife comes down from the office where she has been fighting with a flour contract, and I take the cloth off that crock, and we feed her together, a scoop of flour, a measure of water, the smell coming up warm and sour and older than either of us. We do not talk much while we do it. We have said everything important in that building already. Both of us, on a dock in the cold and against a vending machine. She picked me in March. I have been showing up every night since,